All right, now this is the question that needs an immediate answer. Is China emerging as a new global peacemaker? Because on the face of what is happening, Europe's biggest leaders are headed to Beijing this month with a belief that China, which happens to be a close Russian ally, can possibly bring about an end to the war that has dragged on for over 13 months in Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron landed in Beijing earlier this morning as he embarked on a 3-day visit to China. He'll soon be joined by European Union chief Ursula von der Leyen. So what is the reason behind these top European leaders making a beeline to Beijing? What does the European Union hope to achieve with these visits? The answer is fairly straightforward. They want to maintain good ties with their biggest trading partner. They want to push China to do more for peace in Ukraine. You see, the 27-member strong bloc is walking a diplomatic tightrope. It wants to further its economic ties with China, but at the stake of not spoiling its equations with the United States.
Donc il ne faut pas de naïveté, c'est ce que notre Union européenne, je l'en félicite.
But the EU must also be voluntarily committed to continuing to have a trade relationship with China. And so we must, in a way, de-risk our economies, never be fully dependent on another country, and this is what China wants for itself when dealing with Europe and the United States.
D'avoir une relation commerciale.
Now, the French president will be meeting with his Chinese counterpart on Thursday, and ahead of the key meeting, he sent a message across. The West must not shun China. And it is not just Macron. Last week, the European Union chief had also said that it is best for the Union's interests to not decouple itself from China.
This is why it is vitally important that we ensure diplomatic stability and open communication with China. I believe it is neither viable nor in Europe's interest to decouple from China. Our relations are not black or white, and our response cannot be either.
Now, for months, the French president, the initial negotiator of the ongoing war, had said that China can, of course, play a role in resolving the conflict. He's also time and again expressed his intention to visit Beijing and to discuss the same. In his first big statement on landing in China, Emmanuel Macron said that Paris, of course, seeks to work with Beijing to try and bring about stability in Ukraine. Now, Macron has also discussed his China visit with the American President Joe Biden. The White House has said that the two leaders held a phone call. The conversation, according to Elysee Palace, showed the quote-unquote common will of Paris and Washington to engage with the Chinese and to end the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has warned China of profound consequences if China were to send weapons and ammunition to Russia to be used in the battlefield of Ukraine.
When it comes to China, of course, we are monitoring very closely what China does. Any provision of lethal aid to Russia from China will be a big mistake, with profound consequences. So far, we have not been able to confirm any provision of lethal aid, but this is something we follow very closely, and we also communicate very clearly that this will be a big mistake.
All right, now to help deconstruct with this new strategy of the European leaders as to why they are relying, it appears, on China to bring about peace in Ukraine, we're being joined by Anne-Elisabeth Moutet. She's joining us live from Paris. She's a columnist at the London Telegraph and also specializes in international affairs. Now, Ms. Moutet, thank you very much indeed for taking time out and speaking to us here on WION. The obvious question that I want to begin with is this. European leaders such as Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen are making a beeline to Beijing this week. But the question is this. Does China even have the kind of leverage that the European leaders think that it has to try pull strings to make the guns fall silent in the battlefields in Ukraine?
I would say yes. China has probably the country, the power that has the most leverage on Russia, mostly because China is providing goods to Russia, buying stuff from Russia, providing financial support, currency support, and it's a strong and rich neighbor, and it's a neighbor that can help. The problem is that to begin with, the Chinese were absolutely certain that Putin would win the war in Ukraine. As late as last summer, they still said, well, there's no doubt that Russia will win in Ukraine. I think the Chinese, and I'm not the only one to think that the Chinese have now the second thoughts about this. They are seeing how difficult it is for Russia to even advance. And in general, that means that they have now the upper hand. There was a very visible visit of Xi to see Vladimir Putin, but it's very obvious that the one who was in charge was not Putin in his own country, but Xi. China is probably a good place to go and try and push.
All right, very interesting there. Now, there's also this criticism that is being leveled that the European leaders are in fact putting their financial and economic interests above solidarity with Ukraine, because at this moment as we speak, Moscow and Beijing are in a no-limits partnership. China has not condemned Russian invasion into Ukraine. With that being the case, do you think China is honest enough, even though it has floated a 12-point peace proposal for peace in the Ukrainian war, do you think China is honest enough to try and bring about peace in Europe?
I'm not going to take position on whether China is honest or not, but certainly China has a sort of a shop window right now with this plan, and it may be that the plan is applicable or not applicable, but it's a first step, and right now it's a step that probably would not bring any kind of peace, but at least it's something that you can build on, you can amend, you can change. China does not want to lose the Russian market, and it sees that the Russian market is going to be more accessible, but as a partner, it's a partner only in as much as if it wants to really leverage its power on Russia, it can cut off some of the things that Russia now needs. And you've just heard in the report before, there was the fact that China, the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, was looking at the fact that so far China had not obviously sent the lethal weapons to Russia. That would be a great change if China started to do it. They certainly have the weapons and the manufacturing capacity, but they haven't done it because they realized that might not work.
Absolutely, indeed. My final question to you, Ms. Mute, is this. Now, China is trying to, at least position itself as a possible peacemaker in the Ukraine war. Now, we've heard from France that President Emmanuel Macron spoke with his American counterpart Joe Biden over the phone before he visited China. And now what is being said, at least on the face of it, is that both France and the United States are on the same page in engaging with China. But looking at what China has been able to achieve as a peacemaker in the Middle East, it was able to bring about some kind of an understanding between Iran and Saudi Arabia, two perennial rivals in the Middle East. Do you think the United States will back this French initiative to try and get the Chinese involved for a possible ceasefire in Ukraine?
I would say that, no, the French and the United States are not quite on the same line, but to a large extent, the United States is playing bad cop and the French are playing good cop. The French have got sort of specific interests in China. They are a country that has done less business with China than either the United States or Britain, for instance. But since these countries are now withdrawing from China because there's a very anti-China policy in terms of trade out of Washington that's also being followed in London, the result is that there are opportunities for French industry. So Emmanuel Macron is sort of walking a tightrope in that he's at the same time promoting possibly new business deals with a partner that's going to be less demanding on political concessions and sort of making friends in Beijing and hoping that it might be one possible framework for peace between Russia and Ukraine where there is absolutely none anywhere else.
All right, very interesting there. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Mute, for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
Thank you.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.